everybody. We are just going to wait a few minutes to allow everybody to join. Okay, I think we'll get started. So first off, a very warm welcome to the CDP Ireland Responder Training for 2022. This is an annual event, and you're most welcome. Who's this training for? I think there's something for everyone in the audience. If you're curious about CDP or you want to understand a little bit more about the practicalities of responding, this is a great place to be because in a very short, condensed amount of time, we're going to cover a lot of ground. You'll certainly have a good understanding of it at the end. If you are reporting, obviously, this year for the first time, this is a very good place to be. And also, there's a number of people who, even though their organization or company may have responded for many years, they themselves may be new to the process. So I think everyone will benefit from that. So next. So what we're going to cover today, I am just going to go through a little bit about the CDP Ireland network and who they are and what they do. We're extremely fortunate today to have Nicole from CDP. Nicole is effectively the CDP account manager for Ireland. So she is going to give us an overview of CDP reporting. And we're also very fortunate to have Grania from Clearstream Solutions, who works, I suppose, at the coalface with companies in terms of CDP reporting. And she will actually go through the questionnaire itself. So we're going to start off then with the opening piece. We're going to have the CDP reporting from Nicole. I'm going to go through an operational update, a little bit about how to actually get online, how to manage the dashboard, look at timelines and fees, etc. And then Grania is going to go through a reasonably detailed overview of the climate change questionnaire. And I give a little bit of a few hints on how to actually maximize the time and effort that you put into it. And then hopefully at the end, we're going to have a time for Q&A, which you can use the chat function for that. So next. So just a few things. All of you who have just joined are muted for the duration of this call. Obviously you can, with the Zoom chat, you can put in any questions, which we will field as many of those at the end as we can. The slides will be shared, so you don't need to take frantic notes throughout this. And not only will the slides be shared, but the session is being recorded as well. If you have any questions or we don't get time to deal with your question, there's a couple of email addresses there for some local help with the CDP Ireland network. And if you go through the session and you feel like you want more and you need more detailed help in terms of the responder reporting, more advanced help, that's going to be available on the 1st of June. And that training, unlike today, will get more into the nitty-gritty of the scoring and scoring performance. It's usually a smaller group as well, and it'll enable you to ask more detailed questions, maybe specific to your own company and industry. So next. So the role of the CDP Ireland network. So the CDP Ireland network is, I suppose, a platform for companies in Ireland, primarily, to share global best practice in terms of addressing environmental impact. So the network does a number of things. It runs events which deal with topics, very important topics like supply chain, ESG reporting, and really acts as a basis of knowledge share for organizations to understand more on these topics and to understand where to go to find out more support and details. The network is supported by the EPA and SEAI. It's free for people to engage with. For example, this session today is free. And there is, I suppose, the network provides local support within Ireland for climate change reporting, and obviously particularly around CDP reporting itself. There are a number of social media and social platforms and website address that you can go to get more detail on what the CDP Ireland network does and what CDP does. And ultimately, it's a platform for investors and asset managers to also engage with companies who are in their portfolios, who are not yet reporting, and it provides a mechanism to engage with those companies and to explain the benefits of CDP reporting and why it'd be in the company's interest to do that. So next. So the CDP Ireland network is governed by a steering committee. The steering committee is made up of a group of individuals who give up their time and energies to support the committee. Typically, it's a mix of reporting companies, investors, and sustainability consultants. And it's chaired by Owen Fahy, and really the drive and energy comes from the committee. And it deals with a whole range of targets and initiatives, but largely based around supporting companies in Ireland to make it easier for them to report to CDP and generally to look at their own sustainability reporting. So next. One of the main outputs from the CDP Ireland network is the annual report, the CDP annual report for Ireland. So this is a very important document. It takes a lot of time and effort to put together. We run a launch event, which is usually very well attended, not only by the reporting companies, but it also, many elements of it get picked up by the media as well. But this is a very interesting document. It's available on the CDP Ireland network website and on cdp.net. And it's a very useful snapshot of sustainability reporting in a particular year, say 2021. So I'm just going to go through very quickly a number of the sort of highlights from it, just to give a sense of what type of information is in it. So next, please. So in 2021, there was an increase, which I guess the reason a lot of people are here on this call is because there's more and more interest in sustainability reporting and obviously reporting to CDP. What is interesting is that it's not only the domain of the large corporates. There's quite a mix of companies. Obviously, it is driven by corporates and by public companies, but we also have, you can see at the end of the list there, some smaller SMEs based in Ireland who are interested in climate change reporting. And again, the platform is equally useful for them as it is for the very large corporates. Next. There was a total of 55 Irish companies. If you flick through the list in front of you here, you can see that there's some household names, companies who are asked to report, but also a broad range of others as well. Mightn't sound like a lot of companies, but 55 is quite significant when you look at the corporate landscape, and particularly the level of emissions that some of these companies are involved in. Next. 80% of Ireland's top 30 listed companies now report, which is a huge improvement. Even 5 years ago, it would have been down around 30%. So that's a massive improvement. And you can see the top 10 Irish companies by score, are some household name companies, and many of them have been reporting for many years. It's not all about the score though, and it's not all about being in the top or being the highest achiever. There's an enormous amount of benefit in reporting to CDP, and just be part of it. So it's not necessarily all about having an A, B, or a C. It is around, by just the very nature of reporting to CDP, provides a lot of benefits. Next. But if you zoom out, in addition to those 55 Irish companies that I mentioned, there are a total of 307 companies who may be registered in other jurisdictions, but have operations in Ireland who report out emissions. So it is much bigger than even the Irish reporting numbers that you hear. So next. And one important element of it as well, and a reason why many of you might be here today, is that there is a supply chain questionnaire. We'll get into a little bit of detail about the different questionnaires, but a number of companies within an organization, supply chain, will be requested to respond to CDP. And that's often a doorway or an avenue into climate change responding. But those numbers are growing every year, and there was a total of 72 companies last year who reported to CDP. Next. And just finally, even though we talk predominantly about CDP here, there is this broader push in the sustainability world. You may be familiar with TCFD. You maybe have heard about science-based targets or carbon pricing, net zero, and various other things as well that are becoming very topical in the sustainability world. So we will be dealing with elements of this in that the work that is done around CDP reporting, carbon footprinting, etc., all feeds into things like science-based targets, into TCFD, which is fully integrated into your CDP response. So that's enough on the general stuff. So I think now if we go to next. Yeah. I'll just hand you over now to Nicole.
Yep, perfect. Hi, I hope that you can all hear me okay. Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Nicole Morejon, and I am an engagement officer here at CDP Europe. As Gavin said, I mainly work with companies in the Irish market, but I also work with some companies in the Southern European market and some companies in the DACH region as well. I assist these companies by providing technical support and expertise. Basically, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have and help out with your CDP disclosure. Today, I will give you a short introduction to what CDP is and how we do, and or what we do and how we work. So starting with a bit of CDP's history. In the year 2000, so approximately 22 years ago, CDP was founded when the risks of climate change became crystal clear. Our founders are actually coming from the financial world, so they aimed at driving more transparency in businesses and the impact that they have on our natural environment. And therefore, they leveraged their investor network to engage the largest companies listed on the topic of climate change. Next slide, please. Yeah, so since then, CDP has grown into a global environmental not-for-profit organization, and we operate with a clear vision that is to build an economy that truly works for both people and the planet. And to follow this vision, we have started our mission of focusing investors, companies, cities, states, and regions to drive action towards a truly sustainable economy by measuring, understanding, and ultimately acting on their environmental impact. Next slide, please. So the way that we do this is by working together with purchasing organizations as well as investors. So on behalf of these authorities that you can see here on the circle on the left, we request organizations to measure and develop understanding of their impact, their exposure to certain risks, and of course to take action to tackle climate change, to safeguard water resources, and to prevent the destruction of forests. Once this data is all collected, we feed it back to the investor and purchasing organizations who then use this data to make informed decisions to reward companies with superior performance and drive action. These two different authorities that we work with request companies for the data via the CDP platform. So to those of you joining us today, you may have received a request from either our investors, signatories, from one or more of your customers as purchasing organizations, or from both. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see an overview of our most important stakeholders. In the last 22 years, this investor network has actually successfully grown now to over 680 institutional investors, which from last year is already a 33% increase. And of course, these investors represent $130 trillion in assets. Additionally, we also have the 200 or more than 250 supply chain members, which are the purchasing organizations I mentioned earlier, that represent, that have a combined purchasing power of over 5.5 trillion US dollars. And these two stakeholders utilize CDP's platform to request listed companies in the case of investors and suppliers in the case of purchasing organizations to disclose on their environmental metrics. So last year we had more than 14,000 organizations responding to CDP, out of which more of 1,100 were cities, states, and regions as well. And all these different stakeholders around the globe are using our platform or data or insights in many different ways, whether it is to make better informed risk assessment, to benchmark against their peers, or to inform their environmental policy. CDP is actually holds the world's largest, most comprehensive set of environmental data, and is the only reporting platform that has self-reported data and with a scoring methodology that is publicly available, transparent, and is being run under a charitable mission. Next slide, please. So since we've been founded, CDP has proven quite successful in mainstreaming transparency, and now is seen as the gold standard for climate and environmental disclosure. You can see this in this graph by the steady increase in disclosure that we've had from 2003. So now with more than 14,000 organizations responding, we also have, they represent around 64% of companies globally in terms of market capitalization. And in Europe specifically, it's around 74% of companies. Another thing that you can see from this graph is that we started off with a focus on climate change and emissions data, but later extended our focus to also cover the key issues surrounding water security and forests. And as our methodology continues to develop in line with the needs of our stakeholders, CDP also continues to expand its scope to shift towards a further emphasis on, for example, transition planning, and to define an even more holistic approach to environmental issues by addressing planetary boundaries, for example, through the addition of modules on biodiversity, which is something that I will discuss also a bit more down the line. Next slide, please. So there is, of course, also a growing focus on the topic of nature among business leaders and policymakers. And this is because of the important role that natural systems play in fighting climate change and building resilience. The reason why it is so important to have a more holistic approach is because natural systems do not have a defined boundaries as we would like to think of them. And in reality, many of these environmental issues are deeply interconnected. So of course, we know that rising temperatures increase forest fire risks, but then in turn, forests are a major carbon sink. Then between water and forests, we know that deforestation can increase flood risks, and that around 75% of global freshwater supply depends on forests. So of course, droughts resulting from rising temperatures and changes in weather patterns also increases the risk of forest fire. Then we have water, which is a very essential component of mitigation and adaptation strategies. For example, wetlands play a very important role in building climate resilience. But rising temperatures and these changing weather patterns also increase the stress on water availability, and climate change also increases the frequency and the severity of water-related disasters. So this is just to see that this nexus that exists between climate, forests, and water is very important, since if there's a negative effect on one of them, there's a negative effect on all of them. But at the same time, both forests and water also offer an opportunity, as the correct management of these resources can actually help mitigate the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. At the same time, oh, sorry, it seems that my slide's a bit faulty, but in any case, from the latest science, we've also seen from data analysis, we have this very concerning numbers and statistics. So for example, from the year 2021, we saw that disclosing companies reported 378 billion euro worth of risks from climate-related impacts in the next 5 years. Then in terms of water, the World Resources Institute predicts that by 2030, the water supply demand deficit will be around 56%. So this means that over 50% of global water demand will not be met in less than 10 years. And lastly, in 2020, of all disclosing companies, 57% of them identified risks associated with deforestation. So this is just to show that these risks are no longer as far as they tend to be seen. They're actually quite present, and we hear back from a lot of companies that they don't consider them as material to them, but CDP would really like to encourage these companies to take action and disclose not only on their impact on climate change, but also on water security and forests. Next slide, please. So when a company receives an invitation to disclose through CDP, this invitation will also tell the company which questionnaires they've been requested to by their investors or their customers. Then we have these three: climate change, water security, and forest. The content of the climate change questionnaire mainly focuses on climate-related risks and opportunities. It helps companies to report information on their carbon emissions and their energy consumption. And it also provides a platform for companies to report on their targets, be it the near-term or long-term climate targets. This year, also for the first time, we include some initial questions on biodiversity and how a company is planning to transition to a net zero economy, so transition planning as well. The water security questionnaire is designed mainly for companies that are operating in water-intensive sectors, and it requests companies to disclose information on their water dependencies, their management strategies, as well as their facility level water accounting, and of course, their risks and opportunities that are related to water. And finally, the forest questionnaire is addressed to companies that either produce, use, or sell commodities that are linked to deforestation. And CDP offers 7 different commodities that companies can report on. The 4 first commodities are timber, palm oil, soy, and cattle. So these 4 commodities actually do receive a score through CDP. And we also offer 3 additional commodities, which are rubber, cocoa, and coffee, which are not scored. So of course, CDP still very much encourages companies to report on their rubber, cocoa, and coffee commodities, as this is a way for companies to provide very useful information to the stakeholders. But just noting that if you do report on one of these 3 commodities, they will not receive a score. And and lastly, of course, the forest questionnaire also includes content and questions on what the plans of companies are to phase out deforestation from their direct operations and supply chains. Next slide, please. So here we take a closer look at the structure of the 3 different questionnaires. The modules that are here in a bit darker gray that touch on governance, risks and opportunities, business strategy, and targets and performance are aligned throughout all 3 questionnaires. And these are also the modules that are fully aligned with the recommendations from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or the TCFD, that Gavin also mentioned earlier. These modules are that I've included here are the ones that are presented for companies in the general sector, except for the one in the bottom that I'll talk about in a second. But additionally to this modules, we also have additional sector-specific modules and questions that are for high impact sectors. And these are, for example, financial services, transportation, oil and gas, metals and mining, etc. On the climate change questionnaire, I've highlighted these 2 bottom modules. The first one is the module C15 on biodiversity. This is the new module that we've included, and it covers themes on board level oversight and executive management level, value chain assessment, public commitment, biodiversity indicator setting, progress tracking, and transparency. And as this is the first year that this module has been included in the climate change questionnaire, it will not be scored. However, we do want to include it to allow companies to become familiar with the module and the information that is being asked from them regarding biodiversity. Then I've also included here this sector for the financial services for forest and water security. So this last module is only applicable to the financial services sector. And it includes questions on governance, risks and opportunities, business strategy, engagement, portfolio impact, and communications that are both related to forests and water security. So just a small note here that although we do have 3 different questionnaires, this specific module has been integrated into the climate change questionnaire for the financial services sector. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to further reiterate on the importance of these topics, in this case is on water security and their importance for the financial sector, I wanted to let you know about CDP's latest report, which is on stranded assets, and it has been released this month on the 5th of May. So this report explores how the global water crisis is already leading to stranded assets at some of the world's largest companies, and how this is also posing a significant financial risk for global asset managers and national governments that have shareholdings in companies with high water usage. One of the key findings that we have from this report is that 1/3 of listed financial institutions are still not assessing exposure of their activities to water issues. So these financial institutions need to take steps to prevent these risks, and they can do this by increasing transparency, assessing the problem, disclosing their findings, and engaging with investors. So we will actually host a launch event for this report, which will take place on May 25th. So you are all very welcome to join. We hope to see you there. Next slide, please. So to divert a little bit from the financial community, it is also important to remember that CDP data is not only being used for the finance community, but it also feeds into many other areas. For example, we have the business community that is where we touch into the supply chain program. And we also feed our data into civil society, into academic community, and also very importantly into policy and decision making. Next slide, please. Here we also see where CDP is standing in terms of the ESG ecosystem. So this is just to show that one public response to CDP also goes into many hands across financial markets, as most of the major ESG research and rating providers actually also license data from CDP. And we are continually having conversations with large data providers to further integrate CDP into these platforms. So this is yet another reason why investors, for example, highly appreciate CDP data, is that they deem it to be the source of the real reported data without any further analysis or forecasts on top, which is still, of course, presented to them in a standardized and a comparable format, which is then ready for them to be consolidated and used. Next slide, please. This is also to show how the CDP questionnaire can serve as a tool, and the responding to CDP can offer several benefits. So of course, one of the first ones is that you will uncover environmental risks as well as identify opportunities. So as I mentioned, we do have this module on risks and opportunities across all 3 questionnaires. And this module is actually very heavily weighted as well in terms of scoring. So it is quite an important section of the questionnaire. Then reporting through CDP can also help you stay ahead of the curve, and you can be prepared for any upcoming regulation. So like I mentioned earlier as well, CDP is also actively involved in environmental policy, and our questionnaires are fully aligned with the latest TCFD recommendations. So by responding to the CDP questionnaire on an annual basis, you're already prepared for this very fast changing policy landscape that surrounds the non-financial disclosure topics. Then by filling out the questionnaire, especially on your first year, you will be able to guide your environmental strategy, and you'll be able to see what data is being asked from you and identify which areas you should be focusing on and actions you should be prioritizing. One of the most relevant benefits as well is that by disclosing through CDP, you receive a score, and this score allows your organization to benchmark against industry peers, to identify any gaps your organization might have, learn best practices from your peers. And similarly, by disclosing through CDP year on year, you're able to track your own progress. And lastly, of course, it is your stakeholders who are requesting this information. Then reporting through CDP improves your communication with either your investors or your customers. This way it fosters transparency and helps your organization gain competitive advantage in a world where we see that regulators and stakeholders are placing more and more importance into environmental issues. Next slide, please. So we have also asked companies, we have wanted to hear back from them, and we conducted a post-disclosure survey on the 2021 disclosure. And from this, we've seen that 86% of responding companies have agreed that protecting and improving their organization's reputation is an important benefit of disclosing through CDP. 94% of these companies agree that the CDP questionnaires ask the right questions to raise awareness of important environmental risks, opportunities, and impacts. And 76% of responding companies say that reporting through CDP helps them boost their organization's competitive advantage. Next slide, please. CDP is also encouraging companies to implement best practices as early as possible, or just keep them in your radar. So as some of you might know, CDP is a founding partner of the Science Based Targets initiative, which drives ambitious climate action in the private sector by enabling companies to set emissions reductions targets that are consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement and are also based on the latest climate science. We've seen a very high increase in demand of the SBTI. The SBTI has had a very strong traction. And now we have over 3,000 companies that have joined the SBTI, out of which more than 1,000 of them have committed to net zero standards. So this is to align their reductions with a 1.5-degree pathway, which of course helps them set on the trajectory to net zero emissions. And through this increase in demand, we've seen that it's becoming clear that having SBTs, science-based targets that are aligned with a 1.5-degree pathway is no longer just a nice to have, and it's slowly becoming the business standard. Next slide, please. So one of the latest and most important developments from the SBTI was the launch of the SBTI net zero standard. So due to a lack of a robust benchmark, there was some skepticism around net zero as a concept, even though this concept of the net zero, corporate net zero targets can actually play quite a critical role in addressing the climate emergency. But due to this skepticism over the past 2 years, the Science Based Targets Initiative carried out a very rigorous stakeholder-informed process. And they've developed this framework to enable companies to set science-based net zero targets, which ended in the SBTI net zero standard, which was launched on the 28th of October last year. And from January this year onwards, companies are now able to have their net zero targets independently validated by the SBTI as well, and thereby demonstrating to their stakeholders that their near and long-term targets on decarbonization are actually aligned with climate science. So of course, it can be said that the net zero standard has just started its journey, but the SBTI is also continuously developing new resources, also more sector specific resources. So make sure you watch the space for their upcoming publications. Next slide, please. So this is my very last slide. I just wanted to give you a quick look at the 2022 disclosure timeline. So our questionnaires and guidance have already been available on our website since the 10th of January. In early March, we also published our scoring methodologies, and the official investor request letters were sent out to companies at the end of March. Then on the second week of April, our online response system has already opened, and so now companies can work on their questionnaire directly from our platform. Throughout April and May, we've conducted our disclosure webinar series as well, which range from topics like introduction to water security to forest, further clarification on the financial services questionnaire, changes from last year to this year. And in April, we also hosted a workshop where we had some deep dives on other topics such as transition planning, biodiversity, net zero targets, the EU taxonomy, etc. So you can watch the recordings to all of these events on our website as well. And last but not least, the most important date on this timeline is the submission deadline that is on the 27th of July. So yeah, with that, I've reached the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions to my section, please pop them in the chat and I'll try to answer them now. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thanks, Nicole. That was excellent. And just to comment on that final slide there on the timeline, I know we're in the bottom half of it now. So if people are looking at that and going, do I have time to respond or not, or I'm only thinking of responding? So there is plenty of time. Most companies are realistically only really getting going on it now. So it certainly isn't the end of the world. There is a bit of work to do to get a response in this year, but it is most certainly possible. So, and again, just Nicole is going to be available for questions at the end. I do notice that there is no questions yet in the chat, so that obviously means we're either answering all your questions up front, or there's a problem with the chat function. So if you do have any questions for any of us, and they can be, obviously we will do our best to answer them. If we can't, we can get back to you. But if people can put them into the chat, and we can get them at the end. So next slide. So let's assume that you're totally enthused after listening to Nicole and you now want to actually make a submission this year. So I want to get into a little bit more about how your organization will be classified within CDP and how that may affect the questions that you answer. I'll talk a little bit about the costs and things. And then I'm going to go through a little bit of detail about, okay, so you've decided that you're going to pull the trigger on it. What does it look like to actually make a response? How do you do it? Is it done online, or what way is it done? So I'm going to talk a bit about that. So next, please. So in 2018, I think it was, CDP introduced sector-specific questions. And this is a combination. Traditionally, there was just one questionnaire that all companies filled out, and there still is a general questionnaire there for organizations that fall outside of a specific sector. But if your organization does fall in a specific sector, and normally how that's estimated or calculated is that if about 20% of your business is within a particular sector, then you fall within that sector. If you're a multinational or conglomerate and you fall within a number of sectors, then obviously the one that you're mainly in is going to be the one that you're going to be responding on. So there was a number of reasons for this, and obviously it doesn't necessarily make sense for every company to answer just one generic set of questions. So by dividing up and placing organizations within sectors, it enables much more specific questioning to happen. But this is only throughout the questionnaire, or added on to, or within a certain sector, they may not answer some questions from the general questionnaire, and they will have to answer others. So the other benefit of it as well is benchmarking, which is quite an important aspect of CDP. So when your organization is scored, and there is some general benchmarking that happens within, say, for example, if you make a response from Ireland, you'll be compared to other companies in Europe within your sector, just generally, so you can benchmark roughly how you're doing. And that's very useful information to receive. So next, please. Within that then, that's the sort of general sectors, but within, there is a classification system called ACS, which is used to classify companies. And if you're classified under a CDP activity, and that, for example, doesn't reflect your business, so in order, the way that it goes is you will look at the industry, the activity group, and then the activity that you're in. And sometimes you may not have the exact activity. It may be similar to what you're doing. It is possible to change it. However, if you're still, when you're classified and you're just answering the general questionnaire, and by changing your activity, you'll still be answering the general questionnaire, and there's not a huge value in that. But there is a full list on the CDP website of all of the industry, the activity groups, and the individual activities as well. So you can have a look to see what's available and whether it suits or not. But Generally, this is done in order to decide which questionnaire type that you'll be answering. Will it be general, or will it be one of the company-specific questionnaires? Next. In terms of fees, so CDP do charge a fee. They are a registered charity, but as we all know, everything costs money these days. So there are IT systems and support and a whole range of things that need to be paid for. There are a number of options when you are choosing which fee you're going to pay through the CDP website. If you decide to disclose, there is the lowest amount of subsidized fee. This does not enable CDP to cover all of their costs, but if an organization is particularly price sensitive, it enables them and gives them an opportunity to respond at the lowest cost possible. The standard fee, and I'm presenting all of these in euros, but obviously if you're in another jurisdiction, there'll be a dollar amount, etc. That covers the full operating cost of the CDP disclosure system and helps obviously with future planning, ongoing maintenance, and other elements as well. So that is the fee that most companies would pay. And then there is an enhanced fee, and that's just not paying more, you get more for it. So this enables full support of the CDP, but then you get access to more detailed benchmarking reports, you get screening of your suppliers, you get access to some company responses as well, and a range of other things and some consultations. So if an organization feels that they would benefit from some of this, then they can choose which fee they want to pay. But this is all happens through the online website and gets paid directly to CDP. You can raise an invoice, etc. Next. If you're a first-time responder, which typically we get a lot of first-time responders in this training, you are eligible to do a minimum version of the questionnaire. So this is not the full version. This will just get you up and running. Those minimum versions are not scored. However, it might be a good opportunity to get up and running with a response. If an organization does complete the full version of the questionnaire in the first year, there is the option to make your score private if it gets scored, if you submit by the 27th of July. This is organized directly with Nicole, and she can enable that to happen in the first year. And that might just allow some people, they're a little bit unsure or nervous about having themselves scored first time out. It provides a little bit of comfort sometimes to companies that the score isn't published and out there. If you receive an investor request, which is you're asked to respond to CDP, as opposed to self-selecting, which is you choose to respond to CDP, there is no administration fee in the first year for an investor request. So that again might make it easier for some companies to get up and running. Next. So I'm going to touch a little bit here on using the CDP disclosure platform, what the purpose of it is, what it looks like. This will give you a bit of a flavor for how a typical submission is managed by yourselves, because you get access to this yourselves. So next, please. So the CDP disclosure platform is effectively two things. It's a response dashboard, and it's also the online response system. So the response dashboard is a singular place where you will see a range of information relative to your company. So if you decide that, yes, you're going to respond to CDP, when you log in, you will see your response dashboard. And on that singular page or view that you see, you will see if there's any investor requests or customer requests, that is customers who may request that you fill out a CDP supply chain response. You'll see that there, you'll see who the customers are. And we can talk about that a little bit later in terms of what that means. You can get started with this year's questionnaire. So even if you'd responded last year, this is where you go to, or if this is a new response, this is where you go to click to get started, to demonstrate your intention of responding, to choose your payment method, and then also to do some admin work, which is select who the main user is going to be. You usually have one singular main user, who is the person who submits the questionnaire when it's complete. But that main user then can also invite other people within your organization to contribute, or to have just read access of the questionnaire. So it's rarely, a CDP response is rarely done by one person on their own. They normally will be a group or a small group of people within the company who will be responsible for certain sections, and who will then contribute to the questionnaire and to the response. That main user, that singular main user, gets to decide what the role is of these contributors, and gets to choose how much access they have or they don't have. Not a lot of people actually delve a little further down in the dashboard. You will see previous scores and responses that you've made as an organization. And sometimes you might want to refer to them 1 year to the next, just to refresh yourselves on what you had submitted in previous years. And also, again, something that not a lot of people realize, but there is score reports which CDP provide automatically after a submission has been made. So if an organization has made a submission last year, there will be a score report which gives an overview of the performance of your CDP response, and you can use that. It gives some top level pointers in terms of areas for improvement, or sections of the questionnaire that you might want to improve on next year. And there's a guidance tool as well for if you need specific detail on scoring for particular questions, etc. So within that dashboard as well, there is access to the on response system. So that's specific to each of the questionnaires, or the questionnaire that you're going to fill out. If it's going to be climate change, forest and water, or each individual one, you can click in and access them. And there is the ability to export and detail from Word, and to upload from Excel as well, and to export in Excel. And there's various other information there that you can find out. Next, please. So just the response dashboard, this is what it looks like. When you click in, you'll see at the top right-hand side of so first of all, in the center, you've got your climate change, forest and water. You may have committed or going to commit to doing climate change, but you then choose to select some of the other ones as well. And when you click on the top right-hand side where you have your initials, that'll give you access then to the response dashboard, to guidance, etc. And then on that individual dashboard as well, you can see the users, and when you scroll further down, you can see other information. So next. So within that then, when you click on your name, you can click to other individual access, like scores and responses and other areas, so you can access it that way as well. Next. And yeah, in the middle there, you can see, I've actually already covered it, but if you're choosing to do the climate change, you can, or you've been requested to submit the climate change response, you can also choose or volunteer to do some of the other responses as well, such as, say, water security, or you can choose not to do it and maybe decide to do it a following year. Next. There is help available. So on the top right-hand side, if you're struggling or you need more detail, you can click on help and get more detail there. Sometimes when you're on the response dashboard, it can be a little difficult to find some of the help. It might be initially intuitive, but they have made that improvements in recent years so that they are obvious. Next. And this is very important. So when you go in to complete your response, although you will go through each question and you'll be trying to answer the question as best you can, there is a guidance tool built into the questionnaire, so that when you're on a specific question and you're not quite sure what they're asking, or you're not quite sure exactly how much or how little detail to give, you can click on the guidance tool, and that will give you specific guidance for that question that you're answering. Next. Okay, so just in terms of the user role, they are different. So the main user gets full control pretty much over everything, but in addition to controlling that, they will also receive reminder emails notifications, etc. Contributors have a lot less control, and then people who are viewing it can only view it. So when you're setting up your own internal organization, you just need to decide who has responsibility for what. Next. And this just gives a sort of a view of when you're setting up your users, what it looks like and how you can make or remove them or give them various control levels. So it's very intuitive and very easy to do. You don't need CDP to help you with that. Next. And yeah, finally, if you want to basically get started on your climate change response, you basically click get started, and that will get you up and running. You decide how you want to pay, how you don't want to pay, how you want to do all of that, and it will change the response dashboard to show that you are now going to complete, in this example, the climate change questionnaire. Next. And then once you've done that, once you've clicked the get started and you've set up the main users, etc., you will then get the option to enter the questionnaire. It says when it needs to be completed by, when you need to get it done, and this will be the main area that you go in when you are completing the questionnaire. Next. Okay, so this is an important piece. When you get to push the red button and respond to CDP, you get to choose whether you want the response to be public or non-public. So just to really understand what that means, because it can, sometimes people get a bit confused with it. So when it is public, the response is available for the requesting authority. So if it's investors or customers, they get to see it, but also it's available on the CDP website. So if other people log in, they'll be able to view the response that you've submitted. If you make it non-public, it is still available to the requesting authority, the investor or customers, but is not available on the CDP website for other individuals to read it. And then that response, if it is non-public, some of that data will get aggregated up into reports and studies, etc. So, and one important point, if you do have ambitions around being an A-lister, you have to make the response public. You don't have a choice to keep it private. Next. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but there is basically, with the online response system, if you go from one, if you've reported last year, you don't start afresh every year. So it does copy over a number of the elements from the previous year. There is auto save and an audit trail and various other functions built in there to make it easy to respond. Next. And finally, even though you may have gone through the training here, there's a wealth of information on the CDP website. There's disclosure guides, there's guidance for companies, the scoring methodology, categories and weightings in scoring. You can go as deep as you want into it. And there's also webinars and other type of support there. So even outside of the group of people who are presenting here today, there's a wealth of information on cdp.net to enable companies to get scoring. So next, I'm just handing over to Grania now, who is going to go through an overview of the questionnaire.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the questionnaire. Now, Nicole and Gavin have already said that there's 3 different types of programs in CDP. We're just going to go through the climate change program today, or the climate change questionnaire, just because we wouldn't have time to go through all of them, and the climate change one tends to be the most popular. But yeah, just to take a quick look at the different modules in the CDP climate change questionnaire. And this is the general questionnaire modules here. So one thing I suppose just to note before we go into detail on what questions are asked in each module is that the questionnaire is actually aligned to TCFD. So if you look at the first 4 modules in the CDP questionnaire, the governance, risks and opportunities, business strategy, targets and performance, they're all aligned with the TCFD recommendations, and you'll see that as we go through the questions as well. So by responding to CDP, you're essentially doing fulfilling some of the recommendations of the TCFD. One other thing to note in the climate change questionnaire is from C5 down to about C10 is your actual emissions data. So that's what your carbon footprint is for the reporting year. The rest of the questionnaire then is more so around your carbon strategy and what your business is actually doing to decarbonize and the risks and opportunities that your organization has assessed. So most of the questionnaire is actually more around your strategy, your carbon strategy, and the strategy piece is actually more heavily weighted than the actual numbers for your carbon footprint as well. So that's something then just to note. Okay, so I'm going to go down through each of the modules and we can just talk a little bit about what questions are actually asked in each of them. So the introduction module, this one's fairly straightforward. It's just giving an introduction to your organization. What's your reporting year that you're talking about? What countries does your organization operate in? What currency do you use? And then your reporting boundary used as well. So just a brief introductory module to your organization. So the C1 module then is on governance. So it first asks about your board level oversight of climate related issues. So do you have board level oversight of climate related issues? And then what does that look like? So details on the board's oversight of climate related issues, what's their responsibilities, what roles have oversight on these issues. And if you don't have board level oversight, do you have any plans to implement board level oversight? And a new question this year as well is, does anyone on your board who has oversight of these issues have competence on climate related issues as well? Then moving on from board level oversight, it'll ask, so day-to-day, who is kind of management level oversight of climate related issues in the organization, and what is their roles and responsibilities in relation to that as well. And then the last piece in the governance section is, do you provide incentives for the management of climate related issues to any employees in your organization, whether that's monetary or non-monetary? Okay, so the risks and opportunity section. So the risk and opportunity section starts off with more so asking about your overall risk management processes. So what do you as an organization consider to be short, medium and long-term time horizons? Are climate related issues integrated into your overall risk management processes, or is it a separate exercise? The frequency and time horizons for identifying and assessing climate related issues. How do you identify, assess and manage climate related issues in your organization, and details on that. What risk types are considered in your organization's climate related risk assessments and the process for managing those. So the first part is really around your overall risk management processes and how climate related risks are identified, assessed and managed within that. Then C2 will ask you to go into more detail and disclose in a lot more detail your most material risks and opportunities, or climate related risks and opportunities that you've identified within the business. So it'll ask firstly whether your organization has identified any climate related risks and opportunities with the potential to have substantial substantial financial or strategic impact on your business. If not, then you have to explain why not. And then if you do, then you go into more detail disclosing those risks. So it'll ask on your risk. So what type of risk is it? A company specific description of the risk. Are you able to put metrics on the potential financial impact of that risk, and where those numbers are coming from? And then are you able to put numbers on the cost of response to that risk as well? And how are you responding to that risk? A few examples and case studies as well. So it does go into quite a lot of detail on your risk and opportunity disclosure. In the business strategy section then, so it'll ask firstly, have you integrated climate related issues into your business strategy? It'll ask then, has your organization done a climate related scenario analysis to inform your business strategy? So you would say yes or no to that. And if you have done it, then you would give details on that. Do you have a low carbon transition plan to support the long-term business strategy? So yes or no, and is it brought up at AGMs, is it not? And then are you able to identify your spend and revenue aligned with the transition to a 1.5 degree future? And then it asks more questions on how climate related issues are integrated into the business objectives and strategy and financial planning. For the targets and performance questions, so the first part of the targets and performance module will ask what are your emission reduction targets, and it'll ask you to put details on that basically. So If you have climate related, if you have emission reduction targets, you basically detail those out. So is it an absolute intensity one? What's your target year? What's the coverage, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? Are you progressing against that target? Is it aligned with any external frameworks such as Science-Based Target Initiative? So any emission reduction targets that you might have. And then if you've got any other key climate related targets that aren't necessarily an emission reduction target, so that could be a supplier engagement target, it could be an energy efficiency target, you can also detail those there. Then the second part of the targets and performance will ask you what emission reduction initiatives did you have within the reporting year. So this is where you can talk about any of the initiatives that you might have put in place to reduce emissions within the reporting year, and it'll ask detail on annually how many emissions are being saved with this initiative. Is saving emissions in scope 1, 2, and 3? Are you able to give the investment the payback period for this initiative as well? What methods do you use to drive investment in emission reduction activities? And if you have any low carbon products, you can also provide details on those there. Okay, so then we get into C5. So C5 is the start of the questionnaire that will ask information on your actual kind of carbon footprinting data. So for C5 it is the emissions methodology section, and it'll ask what was your base year and your base year emissions for all scopes. So it used to just be base year emissions for scope 1, scope 2. This year CDP have added in base year emissions for scope 3 as well. And then what standard or protocol or methodology did you use to collect your activity data and calculate your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? C6 then is where it asks you to detail your emissions for the reporting year. So what was your global scope 1 emissions, your scope 2 emissions, any exclusions from your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, what were your scope 3 emissions in the reporting year, carbon dioxide emissions from biologically sequestered carbon, and then your emission intensity metrics as well. So CDP will ask you to compare your emissions intensity, preferably per euro revenue, so ton of CO2 per euro revenue, from the reporting year to the previous year. See if you've gone up or down, and if you can explain why you've maybe increased or decreased your emissions intensity during that time. C7 then just asks you to detail out your emissions in the reporting year in more detail. So if you have any emissions other than carbon dioxide, if you're able to split it out by greenhouse gas, if you're able to detail out your scope 1 or scope 2 emissions by either greenhouse gas, country, business division, facility, activity. If you can do all of those, if you can do a few of those, yeah, it's useful for them to get that kind of breakdown as well. And then the last part of C7 is where it'll ask you to compare your absolute emissions from the reporting year to the previous year. So again, it'll ask you to compare your, say, 2021 emissions to 2020 emissions. Do you know, has it gone up or down? Has it decreased or increased? And do you know why it's increased or decreased? Are you able to allocate a portion of that to maybe some emission reduction initiatives? Was that due to increased or decreased output? So it'll ask for details on that then as well. C8 is on energy. So this is where CDP asks you to break down. So firstly, indicate the percentage of your total operational spend on energy, what kind of energy related activities the organization has taken. And then it will ask you to report details on your total energy consumption, what fuels you consumed, how much of those megawatt hours were renewable energy versus non-renewable energy, and the I suppose the emission factors as well that you might have used to quantify your emissions from the energy that your organization's consumed. And if you generate any electricity as well, details on that. C9 is additional metrics. So much of the metrics that CDP asks for in the questionnaire is related to ton of CO2 data because it is climate change questionnaire. However, in C9, it gives companies an opportunity to maybe add metrics that are not necessarily emissions data, but are related to climate change or other environmental data. So you might have in here, you know, percentage of recycling within the organization, waste metrics. You might have electricity metrics in here. So it's just a space that companies can put in other additional metrics that are environmental, but not necessarily emissions numbers. C10 is the verification module then. So this is where you input any information you might have on third-party verification of your emissions. So you would attach that to this module here. C11 is the carbon pricing module. So if you are regulated by, say, the EU ETS or some other carbon pricing system, you would input details on that in here. You can also talk about carbon taxes and how that affects your business. If you purchased any project-based carbon credits, so any offsets, you can put details of that in here. And also, if you've developed your own internal price of carbon within the organization, you can also put details of that in here. C12 then is the engagement module. So CDP firstly asks you to provide details on do you engage with on climate related issues with your suppliers, customers, or any other stakeholders and partners in your business. And if you say yes to any of these, you provide details on that. So what does the engagement look like? What's the coverage of the engagement, the rationale of that coverage, and what's the measures of success for that engagement as well? Are you influencing public policy through engagement with policymakers, trade associations, funding research organizations, other methods, or not at all? And how do you ensure that activities that influence policy are consistent with overall climate change strategy? And then if you publish your any other information from your organization in relation to climate change outside of the CDP questionnaire, so maybe in annual reports, sustainability reports, or anywhere else, you can provide details of that here as well. So C13 doesn't apply to every company. C13, other land management, only applies to organizations who are in the sectors of agricultural commodities, food, beverage and tobacco, paper and forestry. And it just asks the impact of your company land management processes on land, so the biodiversity, soil, water yield, and response to the impact, and the impact of your supplier land management practices on land and their response to that impact. C14, portfolio fit impact. Again, this only applies to responders in certain sectors. So if you're in the financial services sector, this module will come up. But it'll ask details on the breakdown of emissions of your portfolio. So if you can have the total emissions, the weighted emissions exposure metrics, breakdown of your portfolio emissions by asset classes, industry, country, actions to align your portfolio to a well below 2 degree pathway, and then your client or investees' business strategies and science-based targets encouragement as well. So C15, I know Nicole talked a bit about this module already. So C15 is the new biodiversity module from CDP. It's not being scored this year. But in the biodiversity module, they're asking what kind of oversight you have on biodiversity within your organization, board level oversight, management level oversight. Have you made any public commitments? Are you able to measure and assess your impact on biodiversity, particularly your value chain impact, and measure your progress towards maybe some of the commitments that you have made out there? And then have you published any further information on biodiversity related issues externally outside of the CDP questionnaire? And again, you can attach those publications to that question. And then the last module is the sign-off module. So this one is relatively straightforward. This is the module you do, I suppose, right before you submit the questionnaire. And it's whoever in the organization has basically signed off and said that they're okay to sign off the questionnaire for it to be submitted. Typically, the higher up in the organization, the better. But they don't necessarily have to be the one to submit the button. They just have to have given, their verbal consent that they are happy to be the one to be put down as signing off. And then the last module I will talk about is the supply chain module. So this module only comes up for those who have been requested by customers to respond through the supply chain program. So if you're in the supply chain program, the rest of the questionnaire is the exact same, but you'll have this additional module at the end of the questionnaire that you will have to respond for your customer who's requested you. So it'll ask if you're able to allocate a portion of your emissions to that customer, if any feedback on challenges and a plan to develop your capabilities, collaboration opportunities that you might see with the customer who's requested you, requester-driven emission reductions, and then if you're able to give your emissions breakdown at a product level, you also include that in here as well. The last piece I'll say is just that I know that it's been mentioned that there is a minimum version of the questionnaire. So just to compare the full version to the minimum version on what the difference between both of them is. So you can see the full version of the questionnaire has all of the modules there. in the minimum version of the questionnaire, a lot of the modules either aren't there or maybe pared back slightly. So the emission sections, where it asks you to input data on your actual carbon footprint, are still in the minimum version of the questionnaire. But some of the more strategy sections of the questionnaire, so governance, risk and opportunities, business strategy, they're still in the minimum version, but they're a lot more pared back. So you won't have as many questions in the minimum version as you would in full version. And then there's certain parts of the minimum version questionnaire that just won't be, or of the full version questionnaire that won't be in the minimum version at all, such as carbon pricing. But just good to show that comparison, I think, for anyone who's considering the minimum versus the full version of the questionnaire. Yeah, so this is always a useful thing to say, that I know when you're talking, going through an overview of the questionnaire, if you've never done the questionnaire before, it can seem a little bit daunting, but I know Gavin's already pointed to a space on CDP where you can find a lot of resources. You can find the questionnaire that you can look into, and you can also look up peers' responses as well. So anyone who has a public response for their questionnaire, if you create an account on CDP and you log in, you can access any public response from your peers as well. You can see how they respond to the questionnaire as well. So just a useful thing to point out also. Okay, I think that's it for my part. So
yeah, okay, Grania, no, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. I just want to make a couple of comments first. So if you're sitting there and you've absorbed all that information that Grania went through, and you're going, oh my God, that's overwhelming. I don't think, I don't even know where to start to find some of this information. I don't think we have all of this information. So therefore, should we do a response or not? So I just want to make a few comments on typically how new companies and more experienced companies, the practicalities of actually responding. So the first thing is that certainly for a new responder, nobody has all that information. They just don't, right? So they will have some of the information. Some of it may be there, but they find it hard to find, such as the risk and governance stuff, or maybe the risks and opportunities piece hasn't been discussed previously. But sometimes companies will go, okay, well, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to wait until we have all the information before we respond. So that's not really the best approach. So CDP would prefer that companies or organizations would respond with what they have, because there's a number of elements that need to happen in that first year. So you need to put a sort of a team together. There's no one place within the organization that you can click a button and it prints off everything you need for a CDP report. So you usually have to go and find that information, and it may not be as detailed as perhaps some of those other company examples that you're looking at, but that's fine, because the whole idea of reporting to CDP is that it's an iterative process. So you will report, and then that will highlight the areas that need improvement, and rather than trying to take on the whole thing in one go, for the next year, you can improve on certain sections and areas, and the next year you improve on certain sections and areas. So generally speaking, for organizations who may be at the top of the reporting chain, you have the A-listers, it's normally taken them many years, in some cases 6 or 7 years, to get to where they got to, because it's very difficult to just simply do it from day one. So, and the other thing just to touch on as well, particularly around the emissions data that's required. So again, if an organization doesn't have a carbon footprint or haven't gone down that road before, then they may not have all the information available, or they may have to gather it and improve it over time. That's absolutely fine as well. I mean, if you're looking at your scope 1 and 2, that should be relatively easy to get. However, scope 3 is something that may take a lot more time and effort. There is an acceptance, again, in the CDP reporting process that, like, this isn't someone's full-time job within a company. Usually they have a range of other things to do, or it's just something that's been added on to them. So you spend as much time as you have that makes sense within the organization. And again, these are elements that you can improve on and build on over time. And just the other area as well, which was being touched on, which is targets and science-based targets. So again, you're not going to have those day one, but there are various other types of targets. They don't have to go down the science-based target route. and these are just decisions that company make. They may decide to do more short-term targets themselves initially while they have the time and effort to look at things like science-based targets. But excuse me, the most important thing is that whatever route is chosen, that it's appropriate for the organization at their time. The CDP response is not forcing anyone down a particular road to do certain things. It's enabling organizations to demonstrate their sustainability credentials through the questionnaire, and it encourages then organizations through the scoring methodology and through additional questions, for example, like the biodiversity section that are added on, to start looking at other areas of their business, to start looking at data, to start looking at company-specific examples. So very much once an organization starts off down the road of completing a CDP response, that usually provides a basis for asking questions, for getting data, for looking at improvement, and really can be used as a sort of a platform and guideline for that. And I think what's happening to a lot of companies at the moment, and maybe why some of them are here considering reporting today, is that at the moment there is just so much happening out there within the sustainability world, particularly in the last couple of years, where companies are being asked more and more information. They're being asked to fill out various questions, supplier questionnaires, you know, what's your carbon footprint, what's specific elements of it. And there's just so much being asked of companies that they tend to be very reactive, and they're just getting a little bit overwhelmed by all of these requests. And CDP can add a bit of sort of calm and direction, because you are unifying all your efforts into one particular response. And that covers most of the major areas that are being asked of companies in relation to your footprint or targets or your general climate ambition. And as I touched on earlier, often companies get really caught up in the scoring and what that means or doesn't mean. But it's as important to just start the journey and to do it. And the quicker that you do start, the easier it is then to get to the stage where the climate score that you have meets the internal ambition of the company. So I just wanted to touch on those few bits in terms of how it's normally done. With a first-time responder, and there's a lot to do, so it makes sense to maybe not, to try and get all those sections done without getting into huge amounts of detail. And then for the more sophisticated people, or people who've been responding for a couple of years, what they tend to do is focus on improvements to things like risks and opportunities, and looking at their emissions profile, and maybe gathering more data around scope 3 than they had the previous year, and generally making tweaks and improvements throughout the questionnaire. And they do that every year on an ongoing basis. So that's the usual cadence of it. So there's a couple of questions there, and I think that Nicole is going to answer pretty much. They're aimed at her, so I know they're in the chat there, but I think it'd be useful to go through them. So I think there was I'll start with are there any plans for using CDP disclosure format or questionnaire for reporting or achieving on SBTs, science-based targets, in the future? Any synergies with SBTI in this area?
Yes, so actually one of the criteria for setting a validated science-based target is already that companies report on their greenhouse gases inventory that have to be company-wide, and they have to also report on the progress that they're making against their targets. So of course, it is up to each company how they want to report this. This can be done through annual reports, etc. But the CDP questionnaire, as Grania mentioned, already has the target and performance module. And this module goes quite into detail about all the different targets that you have. It also gives room for you to track your progress, to see how much you've progressed from years prior, and yeah, therefore, by filling out the CDP questionnaire, you are already fulfilling this criteria set by the SBTI for your science-based targets. So that is the synergy from that side. And from the other side, the targets and performance module is one of the most important and significant modules in the questionnaire. And this module, of course, if you have science-based targets that have been approved by the SBTi, then this is best practice. So in terms of scoring, this is sort of what is considered the easiest for companies to get a really good performance in this module. But of course, this is not to say that if you don't have a validated science-based targets, you won't be able to perform as well. Of course, you can have science-based targets set by your own company as well. And we also offer sort of a different route in which you can fulfill the maximum of the scoring in the module. So yeah, so I would say there is quite a big synergy between the SBTi and the CDP questionnaire.
Okay, excellent. And then another question. I know there was a couple of elements toing and froing on it, but I think the initial part of it is very interesting, because certainly at the initial stages of how to approach answering the questionnaire. So for a global firm, is it recommended to submit a one-off global level or a country-specific submission?
Yeah, so CDP has this policy that companies should respond a consolidated response that covers all of their subsidiaries, their daughter companies, all of their business divisions and branches, and respond to it at their highest group level. The reason for this is mainly so that you can also avoid any sort of double counting of emissions data or emissions reduction, and also to reduce the reporting burden for companies, because of course you don't want to be going to each one of the subsidiaries having to respond to a full questionnaire. And in that sense, also in the emissions data, Granny also mentioned this, that there is, in this module, there are questions that are specifically on the breakdown of your emissions, for example, based on the country, based on your business division, etc. So those would be reported and sort of broken down in this module. And then I know that there was sort of a follow-up question to this of what happens then to the response of the subsidiary. So what we usually do, and for this, of course, feel free to contact me directly if you receive word of one of your subsidiaries that they have a request from either investors or from their customers that they don't know how to respond, and that the global parent company is going to include, then please shoot me a message, let me know what subsidiary this is and to what parent company, and then I can sort of redirect this request and make this linkage between these two companies. So then the subsidiary would have see another in their response status, and the score would show the score of the consolidated response, and the see another response status would have a little link where people can click, and then they would be redirected to the parent, to the response of the parent. So you wouldn't, so this actually makes it a bit easier. You would not get an F or a no response if there is this connection that has been created. So please let me know.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. And just one, again, getting a little bit technical, but we did touch on it before, that there are a number of companies out there who get requested to respond to a supply chain request. So maybe, Nicole, if you could talk about, if they are filling out that supply chain request, how easy or difficult is it for them to also then complete a climate change request, and maybe just explain that in a little bit of detail, because I think certainly we know that it's relatively easy, but I think again it crops up as something that people ask over and over again as to what exactly is the difference, or actually are they broadly the same? Yeah.
So yeah, so like I mentioned in the beginning, you can either get a request from our investor signatories or from one or more of your customers. This is the exact same questionnaire. The only difference would be that if you have been requested by your customers, you will have an additional module at the end of the questionnaire where you can input all of this data, sort of allocating any of your emissions to your customers, be either by product or by revenue generated from your sales to this customer, for example. That is it. It's just this additional module. This module as well, since it's only tied to your customer, then this module is always kept private between the company and the customer. So this is not publicly shared. And this is also not scored. This is mainly because, of course, you're requesting customers want to have this inventory of their scope 3 emissions, for example, that is quite helpful. And this is the main information that they're asking from you. But yeah, like I said, it is not scored, so it doesn't reflect your performance in any way.
Yeah, and just to iterate on that as well. So one of the outputs of the CDP Ireland network is the annual report for Ireland. So that only contains company details on companies that have completed a supply chain or forest or water response and it's been scored, etc. So we do sometimes come across companies who say, "Oh, I've completed supply chain response. Why am I not being published in the annual report every year?" So it's not the same thing. So if you complete the supply chain response, you won't obviously get published in the CDP Ireland network report. However, as Nicole said, it's literally the click of a button, really, and you can convert that, because it's the same questionnaire, into a climate change response. So while you're going to the time and effort of filling out the supply chain response, it's very easy then to convert that into a climate change response and get published and be involved in the report if that's what you want, right? So it's a very easy thing to do. One of the things I know we've sort of skirted around and touched it a few times, which is the carbon footprinting piece, which does make up quite a significant chunk of the questionnaire. So I just want to spend a minute or two. I might ask Grania just to, again, it can be, if people aren't familiar with footprinting or how it works and what it is, but maybe just to talk a little bit about, when we talk about scope 1, 2, and 3, what do we mean? And what are some of the common elements of it that that companies will need to gather data on, and how they might gather some of that data?
Yeah, sure. So scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So when you're doing an organizational carbon footprint, your emissions typically fall into 3 different categories or scopes. So your scope 1 emissions is all direct emissions from your on-site or from your own assets. So think of maybe natural gas for heating, diesel in company vehicles. So it's largely combustion of fossil fuels. It might also be a couple other direct emissions, but for most companies that would make a big chunk of their scope 1. Scope 2 emissions then is any indirect emissions due to the electricity that you purchase. So it might be, ESB or some other electricity generator who is burning the fossil fuels to generate some electricity. So it's not necessarily you that's doing that, but it's happening as a direct result of you purchasing that electricity. And your scope 1 and scope 2 is your mandatory that you need to capture in order to say that you have a carbon footprint done for your organization. So you have to get pretty much all your scope 1, scope 2 emissions, definitely over 95% anyway. And a lot of companies will start off just with their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We're trying to get a good capture on those. The other category then is scope 3 emissions. So scope 3 emissions is any other emissions, indirect emissions due to activities of the business. So think of stuff like maybe business travel. Obviously, you don't own the asset of the plane, but if you're sending an employee on a flight, the emissions are happening because you purchased that flight ticket for them. So maybe business travel, waste emissions, upstream embodied carbon emissions from the materials that you might purchase as an organization. So if you look at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Corporate Accounting and Reporting Standard and the ISO 14064-1 standard, they're both the 2 de facto standards for organizational carbon footprinting. In scope, there's 15 different categories. So there's 15 different categories. Not all categories are going to apply to every company. You might have 10 that's relevant to you, and then of the ones that are relevant to you, some are going to be more relevant than others. So I suppose the official stance on scope 3 is that it's really at the discretion of an organization what they include and what they calculate in scope 3. Now, there has been added pressure in the last few years from different initiatives. So, for example, if you want to go for a science-based target, you need to do a full kind of scope 3 screening, and you may have to include scope 3 targets within that. But scope 3 tends to be a bit more of a journey over time for companies. So if you are looking at the CDP questionnaire and you've been maybe requested by investors and you don't really have a carbon footprint at the minute, definitely focus on your scope 1 and scope 2. And then scope 3 is something that you can build over time as well. So yeah, I suppose in a nutshell, that's kind of maybe the organizational emissions. It is a bit of a process in terms of the data collection piece. Obviously, companies are set up very well to collect financial data, maybe less so environmental data. But once you do it the first year, it does get continuously easier over time once you know where that data is coming from within the organization. And you can always improve your accuracy and improve your data collection processes and your quantification processes over time as well.
Perfect. Excellent explanation. So that's it for today in terms of time. Thank you so much to Nicole and to Grania for giving us all of that detail. And certainly, if there is any additional questions or people are unsure of some of the information we covered, please reach out to us. We're fairly contactable, and we do get back to people in a timely manner. So thanks again to everyone, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.